Spotlight Now, we are talking about parents and mental health. The U.S. Surgeon General recently issued an advisory talking about just how stressed American parents are. How does that apply to us here in Hawaii, and what can we do about it? Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Aloha, happy Tuesday. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Spotlight Now. Ryan is on vacation, but we are soldiering on and talking about a topic that really affects so many in our community, and that is the mental well-being and mental health of parents. We are joined now by Britt Young of Explore Counseling. She's a repeat guest on our program, and we invite you back because you are so good at what you do.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm a mom. You're a mom. You have more perspective than I do because your kids are a little older than mine, but I want to get your thoughts first as a therapist and then as a mother. The U.S. Surgeon General issuing this report at the end of August, and the snapshots that they shared about the stress level of parents. Just some of these statistics finding that according to this report, 41% of Americans' parents say that most days they are so stressed they cannot function. How does that read to you, especially given the space that you work in?
Great question. You know, when this first came out, I think my first response was, it's about time, like somebody announced this on a national level, because in our community pockets, it's always talked about in mothers groups and, you know, Mommy and Me, we talk about it all the time, but this is the first time to my knowledge that there's been this national announcement that parents are suffering. And the 41% of parents who say that they feel so stressed they can't function, that actually surprised me a bit, and I'm trying to read into what functioning means. What I believe it might mean is fully functioning. You know, by no means do I think half of all parents can't move or actually function as a human, but are they fully functioning? Are they utilizing all their cognitive abilities? Are they at the top of their game? I mean, probably not. That seems a very realistic number to me. And so it wasn't surprising on that note, because at least 41% of my clients who come in for services are telling me that the expectations of being a parent in 2024, the intensive parenting, the worries about, will my child make enough money to own a home and live? What's the competition like out there? Will I have enough housing and community support for my child? What about extracurriculars? Like, a lot of the vernacular in my particular space comes from, I'm worried my child will get edged out. And that is overarchingly stressing parents out. And then you add on all of these other dynamics like economic strain, job stress, et cetera. I think we can all agree this is not that surprising.
Yeah, and tell me, I want to key into something that you said, and that was intensive parenting. How is parenting different? How have you seen it evolve?
We spend quite a bit more time with our kids than anybody ever has before in the history of man. It's only anecdotal, but certainly my parents and their parents, we used to have smaller houses, remember, and lots of kids. So moms used to be like, get out, and you would go around the street, you'd play with your friends after school for hours and hours and hours, and your parents were there to provide structure and safety and all of the necessities of life, but they weren't necessarily pushing you to learn Japanese and play piano and do 6 other things. This is a fairly new development. And my general thoughts on this is that we have asked parents to do more, and they're willing to do that because they're scared their child will get edged out. And as they do more, there's actually less support. And guess what? Do more, but do it on your own. And we're one of the only countries that really asks parents to do this, and it's exhausting people. And intensive parenting, if you wanted to define it, it might be looked at as the desire and the practicing of managing children's schedules, managing their economics, or their academics rather, making sure that they have a leg up on other kids. And we're all taught to believe that that's the only way our kids are going to make it.
Yeah, and so it's this highly competitive environment.
That's a good word.
Does it differ by gender, or do moms and dads stress in different ways?
That's a good question. I'd say it's maybe 60-40 in my office anyway, with moms doing the majority of the cognitive labor. One mom said to me one time, I don't do everything, but I make sure everything gets done. And I was like, that's its own.
Yes, the
You're
mental
giggling 'cause
load.
you know
Well,
this.
because it's who's buying the birthday present for the party and
Right.
who's bringing the dish to the potluck and did the laundry get done and is the swim bag packed and on and on and on. And that
Right.
mental checklist eventually, in addition to working and trying to function as a person in the world,
Yes.
right? It's quite exhausting.
It is quite exhausting. And the cognitive labor is what most moms will tell me is actually one of the hardest things. I'm not sure completely how many dads take on equal amounts of cognitive labor. They tend to be able to certainly perform tasks and get things done, but sometimes it's at the direction of whoever is in charge of the home. And oftentimes that is mom, because you're right, she's thinking 7 steps ahead and who needs what and when. And that's okay, but as you can imagine, that's a lot of chatter going on in one person's head, right?
Yes, I have a lot of chatter for
I feel
sure.
like you have a lot of chatter.
I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and so the list of things is
Yeah.
long, right? Because you feel like there's a lot of things that they're not quite ready to do for themselves. I know that your kids are a little bit older, so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about how this difference in terms of stressors on parents when it comes to age specific, because we tend to think of the baby years as when people needs the most support because it is so new, but at the same time, they can kind of just be, right? And so, the idea of having my son or daughter behind the car, behind a
Right.
wheel, like, is terrifying.
You're breaking out in sweats right now.
Exactly. So as they get older,
Right.
does it get easier? Does it get different?
Yeah, different might be the best term for it. It might be that the stakes are a little bit higher. So your child not doing well academically in 2nd grade may not be quite as big a stressor as your child failing in 11th grade, right? So I think those stakes academically might get a little bit higher. Your child doing something naughty at the age of 4 might feel different than what a 16-year-old version of naughty is. So I think it's different. The hands-on labor when a child is small and even into the elementary years is high, but the actual emotional labor of raising an adolescent can be very high too. Adolescent parents, there are scary things that happen. Like a lot of children have been exposed to feelings of depression, anxiety, self-harm. It's kind of scarier, perhaps, and the stakes might feel a little bit more important, but I believe the whole lifespan is pretty darn important. When the kids are little, you're really starting to set them up for their worldview. That's a lot on a mom and dad and family members altogether.
Yeah, we're going to talk about policy changes and direct services in the second half of the program with some providers and folks who are working in that space. But let's talk about the individual level. When people come to you, when a mom or dad comes to you and they say, I am debilitated by the stress that I feel raising my children, what are you telling them to do?
Well, first, just validating and acknowledging the whole space. I'm not even sure a therapist has to have his or her own children to go, you are dealing with a lot. I think many years ago, again, to do a little contrast and compare, maybe not both parents were not working full-time out of the home. I believe the number of hours at work is now 33 and a half for moms. It used to be 20, even just 20 years ago. So just, what you can do as a human is just validate somebody else's experience. And that happens all the time in therapy, but anybody can try it. So if anyone comes to even you, Yunji, you can say that sounds really hard and connect with that person. So they come in, we try to just accept that these are feelings and they're difficult feelings. But if they're looking for actual action items, then my biggest go-to, frankly, is always connection. You'd be shocked at how protective feeling connected to others can be. It's kind of like putting on a suit of armor every time you have a healthy connection with another human being. And when moms and dads connect, it is so incredibly powerful. You don't feel alone. You don't feel isolated. And the folks who come to my office with the most dysfunction around parenting oftentimes are feeling isolated. And when and if they connect with others, somehow that eases their tension. It makes them feel like not only am I not alone, there's somebody I could call. Just having that, what's it called in baseball, like that bench or that dugout, sorry, sports fans. You know, it's like there's a few people on my bench that could support me if I needed to. So we try to work on strategies for connection, whether it's joining this club, maybe joining a church, maybe joining a hiking club. And all of a sudden, they start to realize like they're finding joy in their lives.
And also feeling like they're not the only one.
That's the worst feeling for parents. You know, there are a lot of folks here who don't have Ohana. And so they feel like, well, they're so jealous of like the carpool line and there's Tutu picking. I'm like, oh, wow, that must be nice. But you know, then you create, I have now a woman in my life who acts like a tutu. Like you just, if you don't have it ready made, maybe you can create it. But it takes effort.
Right.
And most people don't want to bother people, don't want to like impose. But what I find is that most people are very receptive. If you said, would you like to go have lunch? It's all cool. We're cool with that.
You know, and you talked about the importance of connection, and I see that. And then there is also connecting through social media, and which is its own different kind of connection.
Yeah.
I heard an interesting term recently called sharenting, which I thought was really just keyed right in. This idea that you share so much of being a parent online, and there is there might be boasting or bragging or this is my beautiful family when 2 seconds later we know what that was happening before you took the picture and perhaps right after. So how do you think social media plays into this? We talk about, you know, and we've spoken about the impact of social media on young people, but what about the impact of social media on parents, you know, vis-a-vis each other?
Well, you just sort of nailed something with the effect on kids too, which is that's 90% of the fights with my kids are honestly around technology. It was like, wow. So that's another stressor that the Surgeon General actually brought forth was parents fighting with their children over social media, over video gaming, and the tension that that kind of creates in a home. But but on the other side of that, we'll file that away for later. But on the other side of that, you know, we are very social beings, and we have like an inner activation around comparing. So way back when we were, you know, cave people, like we compared ourselves even back then because it was a way to sort of propagate the species. Oh, she's got a new tool. Oh, I'm going to go make a new tool. Okay, so that's kind of our version of keeping up with the Joneses. And it was very functional once upon a time when we were cave people. It's not quite as functional now. What it ends up doing is facilitating like envy. And so I think being selective around who and how you expose yourself to social media is probably more healthy. For example, am I going to follow a mommy blog that's like, here's the real deal, and you feel camaraderie with someone and you feel like I'm not alone? Or am I going to sort of like scroll through Facebook and see all the like Photoshop pictures of my friends' kids? Like these are two very different cognitive and emotional experiences. One is like, yeah, sister, I hear you. The other one is like, why don't my kids look like that? And you can see the activation of different sort of processes in the mind there. And to be fair, there has been data around those sort of relationships online not being quite as fulfilling.
Right,
as
that
in
the connection
person.
that you're making online. Yeah, tell me about
You know,
that.
I'll take it. You know, if my client's like, it's this or nothing, okay, we'll take it. But if I can nudge my clients into having real person-to-person, face-to-face interactions, I'll take that every day of the week because it's kind of like skim milk versus whole milk, how fulfilling that is. And I do like skim milk, but I do like whole milk. I don't know. You get the metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go back to the point that you raised earlier, which are the internal fights that are happening with families. And in this modern age, the phone is definitely one of them. Screen time is one of them. What are the unique stressors that maybe spoke to you that the Surgeon General laid out?
Well, I think one of the big ones that I kind of perked up about was how many people feel food insecure and economically stressed. Now, we're not used to that in Hawaii. We know what rent costs here. We know what food costs here. But I think when I saw it on paper and the Surgeon General was saying how many people feel food insecurity, I felt really sad. I felt really, really sad. And I felt like, how can you possibly be a fully functioning human if you are worried that you can't feed your children everything they need to eat that night? So when he brought that up, I thought that has to be one of the top two stressors on families. And then, you know, talking about this intensive parenting, I would say the worry over finances and can I provide is just above the worry over, is my child going to be able to make it in this world? Will they be left behind? Will they be able to keep up with all the other smart kids in this world? And so you kind of pair those two together, and you've got a lot of just general worry. And that's certainly tied to how many people are coming in currently to our counseling center saying, I'm just very anxious. What are you worried about? How much time do you have, Britt? You know, I'm worried about money. I'm worried about my kids. And this is like maybe a cognitively normal child. What if you have a child who is developmentally struggling or on an EAP or, you know, trying to make their way academically? Maybe they have a learning disability. So now you've got these worries that many people have, and why don't you just add on a few more and see how we do?
Yeah, and one thing that you and I have spoken about in the past that I'd love for you to share are families that are overextending themselves financially to keep up because of all of the sort of a confluence of factors, right? They want to make sure that their kid has a leg up, so maybe they invest in extra baseball practice, you know, an extra coach or extra tutoring, or take a vacation that perhaps they can't afford because Instagram is pushing them to take that trip. So tell me a little bit about that and what you see here in Hawaii.
That is, to me, the number one, like, happiness killer, I guess, if I had to phrase it that way. And what's ironic about this intensive parenting is that we know from the data that it doesn't necessarily play out exactly as you think. Like, the more time and effort you put into your children, they will plateau at some point. In fact, there was a very interesting podcast about how, and again, I really like baseball. I think it's very cool, but how much time and energy that takes up in families, and how much that then the child is not doing other things. And they've compared the level of income, and it's lower for kids who played baseball all through their years because they spent so much time on this thing that probably is not going to lead to a major league career. It could. And so what you have to imagine is that your instinct is to give more and more and more time, energy, things to your kids, but the data does not support that that is what makes a healthy human being. What they believe makes a healthy human being is an emotionally stable environment, happy and satisfied parents, you know, a lack of stress and tension in the home, social opportunities. And I'm not sure that this intensive parenting where we're spending too much money on things that we think are important, I don't know if that's really moving the dial. So to your point, parents are overextending themselves with tutoring and sports and all these things and all these wonderful things that are great. But if you can't afford them, what's happening is your children see the stress all over your face. So you're like kind of negating any benefit because they're living in a stressful home. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. And, you know, to tie it back to my own experience, it's funny because I was asking my daughter when she was going back to school what her favorite memory of the summer was. And we had gone to Japan this summer, so I thought for sure it was going to be Japan. We also read Harry Potter together, and she said it was finishing Harry Potter, which is like, we got that book from the library.
Yeah.
It cost me nothing.
Like actual zero. Yeah, so if there's one message that maybe I could bring to parents is that we are worried maybe about the wrong things sometimes. Sometimes we think that all of these things, like this algorithm that the world says is going to make your child successful, we forget that that might also stress you out. And living with stressed out parents does more kind of like cognitive harm to a child than not being enrolled in 10 things.
Right. And so if you have a parent who, you know, according to this, 41% saying they're so stressed they cannot function, not to make parents feel even more guilty, but what impact is that having on the child, on the spouse, on the surrounding community?
So anybody who has lived with a parent struggling with mental illness, especially depression, that becomes one of the defining experiences of their lives. Like going into a parent's room and being like, Mom, Dad, let's do this, let's do that. And the parents just laid out like, I can't and I won't and I need to sleep. Like that impacts a child. So not only are kids sort of more parentified, sometimes when there's mental illness in the family, right? So if mom or dad are laid up because they're feeling exhausted, anxious, depressed, someone's got to make dinner. And sometimes that falls on like the oldest child or one of the children. So they tend to have to grow up pretty fast. They also tend to have their own worries and anxieties because mom and dad have not been modeling like healthy behaviors. So if you are overly stressed, I think basically the bottom line of what I got is, if mom and dad are overly stressed, that permeates and contaminates the household in a way that ends up being less healthy for your child than if you were simplified, happy, doing less, but more satisfied with your life. Because when you move yourself into mental illness, because perhaps of the demands of your world, your children feel it.
Yeah, and so not to add more guilt, like we
Yeah,
said.
let's just keep piling on.
What are what's some low hanging fruit around this? Because we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
policy perspectives, what the legislature perhaps could do, what the government can do. That's with our guest after the break. But
Huge.
You talked about connection. But what are some things that you think parents can do easily or relatively easily to kind of address their own stress to mitigate some of this?
I have some ideas. Okay, so if let's just say there's a family system where there's, let's just say a typical family system, whatever that is. But let's say in this case, mom, dad, 2 kids. So my best advice is to remember that you have an autonomous self. So you have to make time for yourself. That may look like knitting or time out with your girlfriends, whatever. You make time for your relationship or your marriage, and you make time as a parent. And so you kind of keep these in some sort of balance if you can. Like sometimes in my office, we'll actually like put on a whiteboard, what are you doing to feed the autonomous side of you? Just Yunji, like a person. And then
That
what are you
once
doing-
existed before she was a mother. I don't
you remember way back, what does she do? Whatever mouth is being fed is going to grow, right? So your actual self mouth, what are you doing to feed it? What are you doing to feed your marriage mouth? What are you doing to feed your mom mouth? And if everyone's getting a spoonful, everybody's kind of growing. But if one's over there starving, then it's going to be sort of not thriving. So I recommend this like deep introspection around, did you forget about yourself? That you're a human too? What do you do for joy? Did you forget this other person is your husband or wife? Like, oh yeah, they're there too. When we become almost hyper child focused, we don't feed these other 2 parts of ourselves. So that's a great place to start.
And, to take it back to you on a personal level, I know you have 3 kids, 2 out of the house, now in college,
Yep.
1 still in high school. How have you navigated this? I mean, I would think that you're much more cognizant of what's happening.
Oh, Yunji.
So how has this applied to your own life?
Well, I think if I got to put up or shut up a little bit as a therapist. And so what I've done in the past is I do a lot of structuring, and that's another piece of advice. So on Fridays, every Friday, I have lunch with my best friend. Nothing gets in the way. Every Sunday night, I have dinner out with my husband. And then most of the other time is spent parenting in one way or the other, but I actually fiercely protect some of these other sides of myself so that not one mouth, again, goes hungry. And where most couples can do this is at the very beginning of being parents. You decide we're going to feed these different parts of who we are, and we're going to do it in a structured way. You've got Thursday, I've got Friday, Sunday night's date night, and you'd be surprised at what happens when you keep that structure in place. You don't even have to stress out. So what happens? Okay, so a lot of people are like, why? I want it to be spontaneous, Britt. Why would date night can be whenever. I'm like, you're out of your mind. Date night never happens whenever. Like if you don't make the reservation every Sunday night, it just doesn't happen. So I think I've just structured my life.
Yeah, and
very
it sounds like
specifically.
what you said, you fiercely protect those things.
With my life. I've got like a pit bull at every door.
Kind of big picture, when you look at this report, the numbers were pretty jarring to me, but I was also encouraged that we are having the conversation at a national level. Tell me that as a mental health professional, what are your thoughts that this is even in the zeitgeist?
100%. There's some sort of like validation that comes with the Surgeon General. Like he says not to smoke, okay, we're not going to smoke. When he or she says something, you perk up and you listen. And this immediately made me feel like we were validated, that none of us is crazy, and like I'm just weak-minded and I don't have a lot of strength of character. What it means is that this person, can't remember his name, I apologize, but the Surgeon General is saying that this is hurting our world. This is hurting our nation. And that felt very, very good in a way. I believe they only put these alerts out when immediate action is warranted. So he's saying we got to do something now or our nation's in trouble. Like if no one's going to, like I'll listen to that any day of the week. Yes, sir.
Right.
Sign me up. That felt very urgent. And I appreciated that.
Yeah.
So whether it will actually move the dial, I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Final thought,
Yeah.
just for parents out there who are feeling this kind of overwhelmed, feeling that stress. What do you say to them?
Right now at when this is over 2:01, go online and find something that you love. Do you love knitting? Do you love snorkeling? Do you love hiking? Find a group of like-minded people to join and build connection with and fiercely protect that side of yourself.
All right, fantastic advice as always. Britt Young here from Explore Counseling. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us. We're going to talk about how Hawaii can support parents on a policy level and also some of the resources that are out there. Stay with us. You're watching Spotlight Now. Welcome back to Spotlight Now. We are speaking today about the effects of parenting on people, not just in the country at large, but really want to focus in now on Hawaii, building off the Surgeon General's report about stressed out parents. We want to welcome in Deb Zeisman from Hawaii Children Action Network and Sunny Chen, Executive Director over at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So, Deb, let's start with you. Just your initial reaction to the data that this report laid out and how you think this is reflected here in the islands.
So the Surgeon General's report was really shocking and unfortunately not at all surprising to those of us that do this work, that we saw 50% of families are stressed so much to the point of like not even being able to function, they say. It bears out to what we see. Families are stressed in so many levels, often economically, right? Especially here in Hawaii, cost of living is so high, wages are low. It's tough being a parent, as Britt was talking about earlier, but I think it's compounded even here with all of the sort of situation of Hawaii and what it's like to live and try to raise a family here.
Yeah, and Sunny, you deal directly with moms who have either just had a baby or also in the prenatal space. What do you hear from the clients that you serve?
Yeah, I just to add to what Deb just said, from us boots on the ground, it wasn't surprising. I almost felt like the Surgeon General was looking over our shoulder, reading our emails or listening in on our conversations. We think about how stressed out families are and parents are with compounded economic factors and just societal pressure, social isolation. We're seeing that a lot and even more exacerbated in Hawaii because it is just so expensive to raise our families here. And the families that we do serve, huge, not just health equity, but inequities. There's a lot of issues within every sector of not just parenting, but healthcare, for example, just huge, issues with the haves and the haves not in our country and our state particularly. So we're not surprised at the results at all. And it's surprising that there are so many people so stressed out, but day to day when Deb and I were out with the community, we're seeing it and we have been seeing it.
Yeah, and Deb, the current administration has made a big push to have preschool access. That's been one of the flagship things that Lieutenant Governor is working on. They continue to open classrooms. Probably not happening fast enough. What more can be done, and what do you see, in this next session as you're preparing for session that could be done from the government perspective to help families?
Mm-hmm. So much. We are seeing outmigration of young families and folks before they have children saying, like, this is not a sustainable state in which to raise kids. Like, it just doesn't work out. So we have been doing some great steps forward in opening more preschool classrooms across the state. That is great. It's something we've been fighting on for 25 plus years to make happen. But that's not alone. Or enough in and of itself. So I think we think about the need for all families to have affordable, quality childcare from birth and then even into elementary school, right? I have a young child. We need after-school care. We need summertime programming because parents have to work. And in Hawaii, parents are often working more than one job. There's sometimes assumptions that a grandparent or an auntie or uncle will do caregiving, but we're finding more and more families saying that is not their family situation because often our kapuna are also in the workforce to kind of make ends meet. So I think for us, it is expanding our public preschool programming, also looking at childcare from birth because that's what's needed for folks to go back to work or stay at work. I have my daughter here with us in the studio today because it's fall break. And then also we've been working for quite some time on paid family leave. So that's making sure that families are economically able to survive when they need to be out for caregiving. So I think it's valuing care, right? Whether it's child care, kapuna care, making sure that families can work and also balance family and caregiving at the same time. So paid family leave is now a policy in 14 other states. We're hoping Hawaii will be next. And what that policy is we all pay a little bit in each paycheck, like we do for unemployment, into a state-run fund. And then when you need to go out for care because you have a brand new baby, if you're a mom, you're a dad, you're an adoptive parent, and also for caregiving. If you have a child that needs to go in for surgery, you have a senior in your family that's going into hospice care, your spouse is needing to go to the continent for cancer treatment, that you're able to take that shortish time off, often a month or two, be able to get paid out of that fund, the insurance fund, and then return to work. So, and that is impossible right now because so many of our families do live paycheck to paycheck. They have no savings. Families go from being like, okay, and then there's a medical event in their family, and all of a sudden they are maxing out a credit card that they have, borrowing money, having to quit a job, right? So the idea of paid family leave is keeping folks able to pay their rent, keep putting food on the table, do the important caregiving, whether it's for a new baby, spouse, whomever, and then go back to work.
And how much traction do you see that getting? You said 14 states. Is there an appetite, you think, at the legislature? Because we did just pass some pretty significant tax cuts. So will there be an appetite for this kind of social service?
I think so. We have a growing coalition. It includes us. It includes Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. It includes AARP, like a number of unions, a growing coalition saying how this is really important for families, part of that safety net that we need to have in place. And I think a growing number of lawmakers that think this is an important program, safety net program, like unemployment, to have in a state, I do think it's important for us to take a look. All the West Coast states now have it. So if you're thinking about when families with thinking about having a baby or families with young children are thinking like, can I stay and work in Hawaii, or do I need to go because childcare is cheaper elsewhere? Housing is cheaper. There's paid family leave in another state. You can now go to Washington, Oregon, California. They have paid family leave programs. I think if we want to keep up and keep families here, it's something we have to consider to be competitive.
You know, Sunny, I want to go into something that Deb talked about, which is this assumption that Tutu will be there, Auntie will be there. There is this feeling in Hawaii that we have Ohana, and somehow they're going to fill in that gap. What do you see in reality for your clients on the ground?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of great things in Hawaii. We do value Ohana, and I would say there's a lot of great things that we are doing. We have extended postpartum care. Beyond the immediate 6 weeks, we have WIC and SNAP and TANF, but I think families are having a really hard time, even though Auntie and Tutu and Kupuna are there to help. And like Deb said, we have a lot of family members where everybody in the household is working and they're all under the same roof. And yes, there's pros and cons to both sides to do that, but we really, really need to put structures in place in Hawaii to make it easier for young families to be able to not just survive, but really thrive. And put money where our mouth is, right? Like we can be a model for other states, not just, follow the trend, but have these paid family leave policies, universal child care policies to make it, easier for families, happier for families, because, despite a lot of nonprofits doing really hard work, there is a huge mental stress, and we have to be really cognizant about how we're doing programming to support the stress. But if we made fundamental changes to the way we are able to support families, maybe we can make some strides and, close that gap.
I'll add, I do think the tide is turning, that I think for decades now, we've treated these issues like it's an individual family's problem to figure out and blame sometimes, which I think also adds to the stress. Like, your family should just figure out childcare on your own. You should figure out your own leave. It puts it on an individual mom often, or a family to figure out.
If you couldn't figure it out, you shouldn't have had the baby.
You figure it out. It's
right?
up to you, right? And I do think the tide is starting to shift. That it's not that. It's because when we look at that it's half of our families in this state are below a survival budget now because of it is systemic. It is a broken structure. And I do think we're starting to hear more and more families speaking out about it, yelling about it. I think more lawmakers starting to listen and understand that it's not an individual's job to fix it. The system is broken, and that we are looking to other countries and other states and saying, just like in the same way, we need roads, we need police, we need fire, like firefighters, right? Those are infrastructure that we have taken seriously and put in place. We need childcare. We need an insurance bank for paid leave. This is infrastructure, as unsexy as that sounds, but it shouldn't be up to an individual family to try to have to figure it out, which is what happens now. Piecemeal together. Right. Can mom come in? Can Tutu come in? Like, how will we survive? Where can I get money and piece it together? It is a governmental and community-wide systems failure. We have a firefighting system. We have a lifeguard system. We have all these other pieces. I will say frequently those structures that we have in place are very male-dominated and not the female-dominated care industry. And so I think that's where we do a lot of uplifting of mom voice and parent voice, that we need more people to speak up and say, this isn't right. It's not the way our community should be. We need to put those fundamental safety nets in place.
Yeah, and I think that was the Surgeon General's call to action, right? There are fundamental changes that need to be put in place for our families to be able to be healthy, and that it affects there's a spiral, mental health for youth, for example, that he had put out before, advisory. If our mothers are not healthy and they're not mentally healthy, then it's going to affect the mental health of our youth. Mm-hmm. And so they're interrelated issues, and so our community cannot thrive, and we cannot continue to have structures in place to have a thriving community that keeps growing if we're shrinking as a population and we decide we're leaving Hawaii and we have young families and we've got pregnant and birthing people who decide we're not having any more children, it's too hard, right? There's models for that. We wouldn't be the first one. There's other countries who've gone through this, Korea, Japan,
Right.
who have a shrinking population. It's a very huge economic problem for a society to have that. So he's really calling for fundamental change in the way we value caregiving, and that there are huge mental ramifications to the way we're treating as a society what parenting is and not valuing it the way we should.
I'd love to stick with you, Sunny, for just a second. One of the things that Britt said that really struck her and also struck me was the food insecurity piece. Talk a little bit about the resources that are out there that people might not be aware of, because when you read that and you think about a family having to function and not having enough food, I mean, that's really heartbreaking.
Yeah, more and more our community partners and direct service providers like Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, we're seeing huge needs for basic essentials, food, diapers, things like that. And I think we were just at the Kahano conference, and the director of the food pantry was talking about some 50% of families, even more maybe, are food insecure. That's astounding. We should be, and the amount of food that they're distributing doesn't lie, right? Statistics doesn't lie. We have so many families in need of food, and they do have WIC and they do have SNAP, or maybe they don't, but majority do, and it's still not enough. And we, even our direct service providers, keep emergency meals and a food pantry, so that we can be that safety net for when families urgently are in need. And we're not the only organization. The food pantry partners with hundreds of organizations across the state, but that just goes to show the increased need for diapers, food, just basic needs.
Yeah, Deb, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, we work a lot on anti-hunger. It's a huge problem. And I think we're of the belief that no children should be hungry, right? We don't want hungry babies. We don't want children going to school hungry. I have two immediate things and one long-term thing that I think could be solutions that I know we will be talking to lawmakers about this coming year. One is that federal SNAP is actually just decreased on October 1 for almost all families in Hawaii. It's going down not a huge amount, but like $7 to $8 per person in a family. If you have multiple people in a family, that can add up. And unfortunately, that is happening at a time when food costs are rising. So I think families are going to feel it even more, that food is costing more and their benefits just got dropped. So thing number one is, I think we would like the Hawaii legislature to consider filling that gap, sort of the gap that families are going to be losing from the feds and SNAP. They can bump them back up. The governor did just announce that he's hoping to increase eligibility for SNAP. That's probably going to take a couple of years. There's whole computer systems that need to be put in place, but I think that is amazing if we can start offering SNAP to higher income families than who get it now. And then I think the other one is really looking at food access in both school and childcare. And so we started a really robust conversation last year on things like free school lunch, free school breakfast for all children. We had that during the pandemic. We know it's possible. I think there's also some ways we can ease and make free food available through our childcare settings, right? So I think, again, I'm a parent. I have kids in school. If my kids can go to school and get free breakfast and lunch every day, that is just one less thing. Again, think about the stress. I don't have to worry about what am I going to serve them. I know they're going to get something that's nutritious, and I don't have to pay for it, is, I think, huge. So again, we had that in place. We did it during the pandemic. We've proved we can do it. We just need to kind of go back to it.
And do you think there is the political will for something like that? I mean, when you looked at the difference that made for families to be able to have that free food during the pandemic, what did you see in terms of attendance, or are there metrics that say this is a good idea and here's why? Beyond, obviously we know that it feels right, but is there something else that shows that?
Well, we definitely know that attendance, which is also a problem in Hawaii, attendance and food are linked frequently. Like if families know, we'll make sure, you can get to school, you get breakfast and lunch. That definitely helps with families getting their kids to school. Our hunger dropped. During the pandemic, child poverty dropped. So it's sort of that those all feed in together. Is there will? I think this is where we're trying to really build and mobilize more parents demanding these things, saying they're important. Because, for example, last year on the food at the legislature, the price tag for free school lunch is under $20 million a year to do that. We were told last legislative session there simply wasn't money, but we gave the wealthiest families a very large tax break. So I think we need real parents, real families to start lifting their voice and calling lawmakers more, joining kind of the movement that we're all kind of working to build, because it's not taken seriously. The lawmakers will tell me, I don't know, I didn't really hear from any people saying that they wanted free meals.
That's so interesting.
No one's calling. But I think it's partly because parents are so stressed out. They're working 3 jobs and taking care of their families, so they don't have time to be phoning their state representative and senator all the time, right?
Let's shift to one thing, Sunny, that Britt talked about, and that was this whole idea of building community. You have direct access to women who have just had children. They're going through lactation challenges. What is the power that you see when moms get to come together, and dads too, in that space?
Yeah, there's some great organization doing the community building for young families. We intentionally try to build in situations where families can get together and build hui around, coexisting other parents who are sleep deprived, right? And there's something supportive about that. So we do have new parent support programs. We've got partner organizations, Family Hui, Parents and Children Together, Child and Family Service, who also have amazing new parent or parent support programs as the children get older. There's Kane Connections, Maui Family Support Services has that for our fathers. So there is intentional support out there, and we should continue to build on that. I would say the private sector can do that within their own companies. Something that we can do really easily is to encourage other executives and other companies to build situations where families within their own workforce can feel supported, because isolation has been a huge highlight, in light of social media and mental health. People are just feeling really isolated, working all the time, trying to make ends meet. So I think that those are different opportunities that we can do in order to support the community at large.
Yeah, and Deb, it goes to what you were saying about parents not necessarily having the bandwidth to testify, right? And also maybe they don't want to be the face of saying that this is hard for my family. Tell me about the power, though, in having that kind of voice.
I think what we've seen in the last several years is nothing changes if people aren't willing to speak up around it. So I think that's where we are doing more come to a rally at the Capitol. So we run a parent leadership program that does civic engagement and is building parent voice and parent power. So we have parents from all over the state that are saying they're fed up with a variety of things and kind of starting to organize and bring other parents together. Other industries have it, right? We have loud union voices sometimes. Different sectors of the industry are often in the ear of lawmakers. Parents and caregivers, much less so, because they're probably doing the caregiving.
Busy, right.
So I think that's nationwide. We are seeing that caregivers kind of starting to unite a lot more and say we have to speak up or we'll keep getting bypassed.
I know that you do a massive amount of data collection with Kids Count, and I'm curious to know how we stack up compared to other states. How are we doing? Because, as we talked about in this conversation, we are a culture that values ohana, right? Family is supposed to come first in Hawaii. Are we actually doing that? Are we supporting families? And how are we stacking up to other states?
Yep. Thanks for asking about that. So Kids Count is a national data report that comes out every year, and it compares the 50 states. How are people doing? How are kids faring on a variety of measures? And for us, it's often, and this year as well, mixed report card, right, in terms of how we're doing. I would say we often do fairly well on things like health because we do have things like we have Quest in our state. So a lot of our kids have health insurance, whereas in many other states they don't. So Hawaii in many ways is a great place to raise a child, right? Where we don't fare so well is the pieces we've just been talking about. That we have a high percentage of children in families that are economically insecure, a high percentage of children that are living in overcrowded housing or are homeless. And also, we saw this year an uptick in school absenteeism, which we also know, especially for low to middle income families, school absenteeism is actually linked to other members of the family needing care. So the fact that if a younger child is sick, if a 4-year-old is sick at home, it might be that 12-year-old child that has said, you need to stay home from school today and take care of baby sister. When we don't have an adequate adult caregiving system with childcare, with paid leave, we often see kids, because they're not the working, a lot of families, no one has sick days, no one has paid family leave. So if you don't have any paid sick days from your job and there's a sick family member, someone needs to stay home. And it is often an older child taking care of like another family member. So we definitely are seeing, I think, more of that. We're seeing school absenteeism that is likely linked to economic factors. No transportation to get the kid to school that day, right? So that's of concern to us, because when we see chronic absenteeism going up, we think economics. Like, that's often families that are in an economic situation where they can't get that kid to school. Not that the kid doesn't like school or things like that. It's usually, again, more the systems around it.
Right. And Sunny, I know that you're a national organization as well. You run the Hawaii chapter of Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, but there are other Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies in other states. How are we doing compared to those?
So maternal mental health, I can kind of highlight. We do participate in CDC's maternal mortality review committees. 50% of the maternal deaths are preventable, and a majority of those preventable deaths have a mental health attributed to it, and substance use. A quarter of those are substance use related. And if we compare that nationally, we're not doing great. We're not awful. We're kind of in the middle when it comes to maternal mental health, but also just maternal mortality, morbidity. And also think about not just maternal deaths, but for every one maternal death, we have 100 near-death experiences, which means mothers or pregnant and birthing people who go through pregnancy and the postpartum period are probably severely traumatized, right, from that near-death experience. So I think that just highlights the need for mental health support for people going through birth and postpartum period, and maternity care in general in our country. We're not doing great.
I mean, Deb, we've painted a pretty bleak picture here today. And the
Sorry,
Surgeon General
Angie.
report, I mean,
Yeah.
facts are facts. If 41% of parents are saying that I'm so stressed that I can't function on a daily basis, obviously he's sounding an alarm that this is a problem. Do you think that this is a tide that can turn?
I hope so. And I think that's the basis of the Surgeon General report. They're trying to put some national attention to it as well. So I think it's a tide that has to turn. It has to. We sometimes talk about things like literacy, like we want parents reading to their children, and Brett was talking about driving kids to different activities and sports and things like that. But it's also that hierarchy of need. If a family is concerned that they can't pay rent, if a family is concerned that they're on the brink of homelessness, which again we know for children, those children under 1 that's the time when children are most likely to become homeless. Because again, it's lack of paid leave, and that's when somebody needs to drop out of the workforce right now and not get paid to take care of that new baby. So if families are concerned about not being able to make rent, if families are concerned about not being able to put food on their table, nothing else matters, right? You're looking about basic safety, basic survival. And so all those other things, you're just stressed to the max. And all those other things that we also have from society, you talked about social media, all the things we're sort of telling parents you should do to be a good parent, are almost impossible for many, many people in our community, because people are just getting by. And I think we need that tide to turn, to put those structures in place to move families out of crisis mode, out of that high stress, high adrenaline all the time. Like, can I pay my bills?
It has
So
to.
into a time of thriving where we can say, hey, can you coach the basketball team? Can you, all those other things that we want families to be able to do that are more about quality time together. We see more and more families unable to do that because they're just surviving.
Wow, we are almost out of time, but I'd like you both to give a final thought. If someone is watching this, I'd start with direct services. Where should they start if they feel like, okay, I'm really overwhelmed, I need some help?
Yeah, I think I would like families to know and parents watching, there's no shame. I think culturally there's a lot of shame. Even in, a lot of Asian cultures, there's shame to asking for help. So ask for help, find your healthcare provider, your social network of friends, and if you need professional help, there's counselors. If you need resources, there's Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, and all of the nonprofits that we talked about earlier who have resources to direct you to get help, whether it's individual, find a group, find your hui of friends to get you through. So I think that's the most important thing.
And Deb, if there are parents who want to lend their voice this legislative session, how should they do that?
I hope you'll put our website up. It's Hawaii Children's Action Network. You can Google us, but we have a growing number of families that are fed up, that are advocating, that are speaking up, and in little ways and in big ways. And I think all those ways matter. So we have about 5,000 family advocates now around the state, and we need more. I think, again, we're going to need a tidal wave to create that wave of change.
Well, thank you both for being here, Sunny Chen and Deb Zeisman. We'll be right back right after this. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk. Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
A discussion with the two candidates who want to be Hawaii County's next mayor.
Mayor Mitch Roth and Dr. Kimo Alameda will take our questions and yours. Scan the QR code to submit your questions.
Watch this special edition of Spotlight Now. And a reminder, the Hawaii County Mayoral Forum is happening next week at our regularly scheduled time. We'll be having Mitch Roth and Kimo Alameda live to talk about what their vision is for Hawaii County. We still want you to submit those questions online through that QR code and the promo that you just saw there. Wonderful to hear on all fronts about what parents are facing here in Hawaii and nationally, knowing that you're not alone if you are struggling through this, that a majority of parents feel a lot of stress, and in some cases a debilitating amount of stress, that there are resources in our community to help you. So just a really interesting conversation today. I'm so glad we got to have it. We thank you all for watching, and we hope you participate in our debate next week. Also want to remind you that all of our shows are archived at hawaiinewsnow.com, so you can go back and watch these interviews again or share them with your friends. If you know a parent who might need to hear this information, please do share it, because we want to be a resource for them as well. We leave you now with a beautiful shot of, it looks like the Reef Runway and Honolulu Harbor. I see Aloha Tower there. A gorgeous day here in Hawaii. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time, aloha.